Hello and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast, where every week a few friends get together with our randomly designed, randomly imagined story elements. We combine them together to make something that Amazon will want to buy and make a TV show of. I'm, of course, Levi,
And I'm Seth.
and we are here to tell you a story. I have history. What did you have, Seth?
I had Pantheon.
Oh, great. Do you want to go first or should I go first?
Um, I'll go first. Mine will be really quick, and then we can get to the history.
Okay, great. Let's hear it.
Okay. So as far as the Pantheon goes, there isn't really a pantheon in the sense of a pantheon that actually has any power. Um,
Okay.
it's simply like household gods, household idols. So people in their attempt to, let's say, move what do you call it, responsibility from themselves, so that if it doesn't
Right.
rain or if their crops don't grow, it's not really their fault. It's now just kind of like it's
Yeah.
Frege, the god of harvest. And if they had a bad harvest, well then Frege is out, and obviously there's a different god of harvest that's moving in that now they need to make a little spot for and
Right.
whatnot. And if they really come to be endured to that, person, if let's say they don't seem to be listening, then they'll make like a sub like intermediator almost. And again, if you're Catholic, this isn't an offense to Catholics if that's what you believe, but they make like, so instead of praying right to Jesus, they'll like pray that Saint Michael will intercede for them, or Mary will intercede for them before Christ, who will intercede before the Father. That
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
And so if like my grandfather, had Frege, the harvest deity, and he's just so busy because he's so good, he just doesn't have time to listen to us. So if we have, Fro, we can, pray to, Fro, who's the mahogany wood goddess that then intercedes to us before Frege,
Right.
because that was
Right.
grandfather's favorite, Lord of the Harvest. And really they're nothing. It's just like a coping, like a
Mechanism.
scapegoat. And so like everybody could have their own little, I guess you could say, pantheon. And so I guess maybe there's, let's say, enlightened people that know that that's kind of bogus, and they
Right.
you know kind of show
Or there's,
disdain. But
I guess it kind of probably follows like cities, certain cities all, it's like a popularity contest. Certain cities will all kind of worship the same kind of god. I imagine that like there's priests who are kind of priests, kind of storytellers, kind of bards, who just like, here, what new thing do we need to pray to today? Let me tell you a story about this new thing we figured out. Now the gods want you to bathe in order to be clean. And it's like, what? Yes, this new god came over the ocean and he said, bathe now to be clean. And everyone began to bathe and everyone began to be clean. And therefore everyone got less sick. And they said, wow, that god must be real.
it only worked if they paid the tithe to the goddess of bathing and cleanliness,
Right.
Bauth.
Bouth.
Bauth. And so
Yeah.
to pray to them, it would be like taking a Bauth.
Right. That's great.
And so like maybe, yeah, some of them take on, but like just about everybody does it. But like anybody that thinks for a moment realizes that everyone's just kind of making a philosophical scapegoat for themselves, and as many as they need to kind of feel good about
Right.
making something happen or having something else to pin good or bad things on.
Cool.
So that's the Pantheon.
This world sounds really depressing. I do not want to live there. So I have history, and the history is pretty simple and straightforward. Basically, about 1500 years ago, there was all the worlds. There's 5 major kingdoms in this area that the story is taking place, and there were 5 kings, and there was the Dark Lord, and there was epic battles and fights and valor and songs, and everyone has all this information. We all have this history, but they couldn't win. These 5 kingdoms could not overcome the Dark Lord, and he was winning. And so as the story as the story goes, uh, a great sort of conflagration of effort goes into training these 5 legendary wizards, each one of them sort of mastering a different school of magic. And maybe this is the magic system as well, but I'm thinking your classic D&D style magic. It's like you got components and you put them together and you can cast fireballs, or you can cast poison arrows, or you can change the way you look, or you can make yourself levitate. Just imagine kind of Harry Potter-esque magic, right? But a lot more sort of components and stuff like that. And there was 5 of them, and they sort of grew up in these distant countries, but then all sort of banded together as the countries were kind of falling apart and the kings were dead, and they all banded together and they stormed the castle of the Dark Lord, and they, single-handedly killed him. And this, how the story goes, well, for the first 50 or so years, how the story went is that these were the best of the best. These were the people's people. These were the cream of the crop, heroes of legend. These people were, these wizards. And they were essentially, after they had killed the Dark Lord through struggle and trial, were appointed as kings of the 5 kingdoms. So each one of them went back and became the king of their 5 kingdoms. And for the first 50 years or so, that was considered the story. And I'll point this out. It's well documented in history that it was incredibly rare for anyone to have magic, the ability to use magic, and the Dark Lord had pretty much captured everyone who could use magic. And by the end, these 5 wizards were the most powerful, but also the only people who could use magic in the entire world. So after about 15 years after they became kings, the resurgence of magic started to happen. But the problem is that it wasn't in schools. It wasn't in, arcane guilds. People weren't relearning how to use magic. It wasn't awakening in response to the Dark Lord being dead. The reality is that these 5 wizards would, how do I say this, visit the ladies of the night on occasion. They weren't virtuous people. They were anti-heroes, really. They were people who were willing to do the job, but they had a lot of illegitimate children, a lot of bastards. And these bastards kept sort of cropping up as the years would go by. And they would oftentimes turn into villains, or they would try and fight against the government, or they would try to fight for the government. It basically, since then, now here we are 1500 years later, if you present an ability to use magic, you're considered basically the descendant of a bastard. It's like, in one hand, it's held in high regard because means you can use magic, and that's really cool. But on the other hand, it means that you are the descendant of an illegitimate pairing, an illegitimate birth, right? Because none of the wizards ever got married. They never created any line. But it was about 50 years after this started to crop up that the whole world kind of rebelled against the wizards and forced them to take responsibility and form the 5 schools, and B, basically put in perpetuity opportunities for anyone who would present with this magical ability to learn to use it in a way that's good and not to just kind of break the world, if that makes sense. And they decided that bastard was a bit too harsh of a thing, especially for people who were born hundreds of years after this. Why should they have to sort of walk around with this name kind of hanging over them? So they used an easier word that meant the same thing, but was lighter on the mind. So they called them baseborn. So yeah, that's the history. So as we sit now, 1500 years after that, the wizards are all dead. The main five wizards are all dead. And the baseborn, when they present, sort of, it can skip generations or whatever, but when they present it, by blowing up a house or by lighting a fire or by healing someone miraculously, this closest school to them kind of gets a ping that magic was used, and then they sort of send someone off to find them and to hunt them down because part of the sort of the part of the rules that the wizards had to abide by was they had to basically have an insurance claim. you know their vast wealth had to help pay for, even now 1500 years later, if your kid is a baseborn and he blows up your farm and the representative from the school comes, you get the money to rebuild your school. I mean, rebuild your farm. And typically, what will happen is the kid will leave, and if you're on good terms with the kid, if you're on good terms with your child, if they're like a 6-year-old or a 15-year-old, and you're on good terms with them, then oftentimes, they'll come back and that'll kind of lift your station. But if you have a really rebellious kid and he shows off, he presents the baseborn trait when he's closer to manhood, you might just say get out and just what's it called when you give up all parental rights, you know
Disown.
yeah, when you just basically disown the kid. So there's different economic status, different economic positions for different people will result in different things. If you're a absolute poor squalor person and your child shows baseborn ability, it might be just too shameful, or it might be really inconvenient, or you know, I was thinking of, like, I was watching The Witcher TV show, based on the books, and this one girl was like bent. She like had some disease where she was like kind of like hunchback, and she couldn't do anything around the farm. And the wizard people came and were like, "How much for her?" And her dad just like sold her. And I'm not saying that happens all the time, but that can happen sometimes. That can add complexity to the different people who are in these schools and lead to a hero or to a villain or to a whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've got a couple different ideas brewing, and I don't know if I should save. I've got one particular character in mind, but I don't know if I should introduce him now because I'm not sure if this guy should be a villain or a hero.
Well, let's just
Um,
hear who he is. I don't know. We're 15 minutes into this, so
okay.
we got
So
time.
a couple different ideas of what's going on here is as let's say time has progressed, you know, the first let's say 100, couple generations, I
Right,
would say most of the baseborn, were pretty well versed in just about, whatever magic. And you said like there's the five schools, right?
right.
So perhaps, those have developed into five different like subcategories over time. About
Yeah.
500 years in, they realized that, there was like, I don't necessarily want to make it elemental unless we want to make it elemental, but like
Well,
five
five
different.
schools, five elements. It's fine.
I was just trying to like think and go, okay, like maybe some people started showing more affinity towards, one aspect, as time went on, instead of kind of having a pizzazz for everything as that, let's say, bloodline started to thin out.
Right, my thought was that the each wizard originally specialized in a specific school, like a specific class, and one of the first things you do when you come to a school is you take a blood test. You take a divining test to figure out whose lineage are you in, And there's a value to being only in one person's lineage, because then whatever power they propose that they manifested most powerfully, you can focus on that. But there's also an advantage to be in like both air and fire, because that means you can combine those two things together, or spirit and air. That means you can combine those things together. And some people kind of like Lightbringer, where you have different aspects of light. Kind of that
Hmm.
same idea is it's like it's really valuable to be just one thing, but it's also really valuable to be everything, even
all in
though
your
that
own.
takes a lot more work, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And so I think, what is it, 1500 years now, and you
Yeah,
have, some, let's say, class systems where some of the elite in the world are, you know, trace their lineage back between two or three of them, and they have, kind of a one up as far as their power because they've, married the right people, arranged the right marriages for their kids,
right,
set themselves up, game of houses style, in the right places, the right time with the right people to kind of perpetuate the power of maybe not just for themselves, but then their future generations, so that now, you have like the heads of these different schools, or maybe the I would say a lot of the people in power, again, trace their lineage back to these people.
right,
Um, but there's, a lot of different groups. I'm just thinking of like different guilds or different like mercenary groups that are, let's say, perhaps too weak for formal training in one of the schools, or like maybe some of the people that, weren't around, or they were disowned, then they kind of would make different mercenary groups where then they can, like have a light healer, or an illusionist,
right,
or a kind of like a slight mind, or like a fire mage that can, shoot fireballs, or like get, like, I don't know, kind of like I guess you had like a D&D group, or like I don't know what would that be. I don't do that as
like an
often, but
adventuring party.
yeah. Or then like
Yeah,
mercenaries, though, and they can hire themselves out. So I kind of envision that there's, groups like that out there,
right,
that aren't exactly in the high up and the up, but they kind of, go around and, profit off of their services, being offered to, small
right,
villages, or, things like that.
right. You
The
know, oh, go.
Sorry. Okay, so then all that aside, that was just one thing I was thinking of. The other thing was then a particular character. So this kind of then comes in and kind of melds the pantheon with some of these people. I have this idea for like a almost like a traveling monk or something, right? And he's got, again, his own little household gods, right? And amongst the right circles, like he's kind of like, okay, he's, perpetuating, he might have some amount of power, but then it just kind of seems like he might be perpetuating this kind of, peasants little household god thing, right?
Right,
But he has like all these little god, let's say, little idols. But what he has with them is he's basically killed off and trapped either the essence of the power that one of the other like mages would have,
oh,
or them themselves in one of these things. And then he can basically use what they had through like one of his little artifacts
yeah,
that he has them entrapped in. And so
right,
I had that idea for that. And so then it was like, okay, he could be like a good guy, kind of like a monster hunter. What's that, Van Helsing kind of guy,
yeah,
who's kind of, kind of travels around, kills kills these rogue mages and troublemakers, but then in doing so, like, traps the essence of their, magical ability, so that then he can, use
like the
it to,
Mushi master.
yeah,
Yeah, I like
uh,
that because part of the idea being is that when the Dark Lord was killed, the wizards didn't. They just kind of like opened up all the gates and left. So like a lot of these kind of magical creatures just left the Dark Lord's domain and have kind of been terrorizing people ever since. You know, if you read the official books, the wizards were like these awesome, just conviction filled powerhouses of crazy goodness. But the reality is that they were really self-serving and they did not they cared about gold and power and they did the right thing because the whole world was kind of pressuring them to, and now we're kind of dealing with the remnants of everything that's happened since then.
yeah. So what would your opinion, would this guy be, should we play this guy out to be a good guy or a bad guy?
I kind of like the idea of maybe a wise old man or an anti-hero,
Okay.
you know, kind of a on the fringes kind of guy. You know, he sells himself out to fights, to battles that are about to take place because he wants to go and sort of hoover up people's abilities, you know? I also like this idea that people have these household gods, but with the baseborn becoming not less popular, but more popular, it's like year over year more people are baseborn, you know?
Hmm.
The whole faith aspect of these household gods mixed with the spirit aspect of one of the elements that the baseborn can use, things start to like be weird and start to kind of not change. They're not creating pantheons or gods or anything, but you start to see it as like maybe the first baseborn, because one of the key elements of being a baseborn and joining the schools is you're kind of led on to the fact that like all the household gods are this, that's completely a myth, that's a coping mechanism, don't believe it, you know, like
Like
the
nature is
baseborn.
as nature does. No amount of wooden or gem
Right,
encrusted.
will do anything.
Yeah,
They're good for spell components, they're not good for anything else, you know? And so most baseborn tend to be kind of cynical, anti-religious, sort of atheistic, scientific based. You know, if magic could be the science of magic, that's kind of like that's where we find our meaning and our power from. You know, and they have already access to it because they produce magic, but everyone else doesn't. But maybe this guy sort of starts to ride the line of if I use the spirit, like being one of the elements that I have access to, and channel it into this depiction of a household god, I can produce a certain result based on my conviction of its reality, you know?
yeah,
And not saying that he's creating a deity or anything, but he like the beginnings of what would be considered a paladin or a cleric in D&D. It's like they use their faith in their devotion to their god in order to channel the magic provided for them by their god. In this same way, this guy is kind of mixing the magical world and this kind of fantastic home, I don't know what you call it, house, what did
it'd
you
be like
call
a
them?
household gods.
Yeah, household god system, and is kind of using his belief and his faith to trap these people. And it's like it's this weird thing that's starting to happen. And this is the point, like where as more and more people are baseborn, lots of strange things start to happen. You know, things start to change as a result of the amount of magic that's being used. You know, and I'm not trying to change your thing at all and say that deities will be coming, but
Right. I was just thinking of that too. Like I can imagine him entrapping like a water mage's, power in something. I don't know, because everything kind of comes back to, like rain and whatnot.
right,
Like a couple different things with it. And it's like I can and then like leaving it with a family, and then like it's not so much that it is a god. It's just reacting to their conviction that something better can happen, and their need for, let's say rain or sunshine or whatever is inhibiting that, um,
right.
to activate. So they aren't baseborn, but their conviction to needing what that has to offer, like activates the power that's residing in that artifact.
Right. You know, here's an idea if you're up for it, to kind of give some evidence as to why people would use the whole household god system is like
Okay.
you basically before, right? There was man, like the earth was created, however, doesn't matter. There was man. Man existed on the earth. This was, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, whatever. And the way that the earth was created was all of the elements were given a set amount of will, right? A great will to run the oceans. a lesser will to run the lakes, a quick will to run the rivers, a fiery will to run the sun, a will to run all of these different elements they manifested as a will, and we saw them as elementals. We called the raging waters a harsh mistress. We There was some recognition, and at some point in time, the will of nature kind of was recognized back and was given to people, and the will was shared with them, right? And people worshipped, it's not worshipped, but they held in regard things like the clouds. They held in regard things like the tide. They didn't just say, "Oh, that's the tide." They didn't know that the tide happened because of the will of this part of water, and so they set their watch and warrant by it. They understood that things would happen based on how nature was progressing. And because there was that sort of that relationship between man and nature, we found out how to use some of that, which was the beginning of being able to use wizarding stuff. But it was really rare, and it didn't really manifest as anything. And then thousands of years of history go by, and you have the Dark Lord kind of bringing all of these people who can use power together, and people still remember the time when you would sort of treat your field like a person, and you would consider it, and it was a relationship with your field, and just through the span of time it became a god of fertility, or a god of the harvest, or a god of storms and rains. And since now it's kind of been perverted, that would kind of give the beginnings of why they would try and why this household god kind of even arrived, because there were no actual gods. It was just like the will of the water. But people try to codify and create things where maybe that it doesn't exist all the time.
But a
You
physical object where there is not a,
Right,
physical presence.
right.
Something
Where in
tangible for something intangible.
Right. And they've, now they do it for a bunch of different stuff. It's like, about to put my baking in, gotta, you know, s- sprinkle a little flour on top of the hearth mother idol by the oven. It's like, even if you did have the idea of being in a symbiotic relationship with the fire in your thing, you're not going about it the right way. You're worshiping it, not worshiping it. You're not considering it in the way you should be, and so it's useless. But
Mhm.
this guy that you're talking about, maybe he is kind of rediscovering some of that. So he, you know, carves a river rock into a little idol, and then fights this water mage and is able to capture that will power that he has in his blood, in his body, into this rock, and then give it to the farmer. And then that kind of acts as like the go between actually forming a symbiotic relationship with the earth, and allows them to sort of look at the statue and say, we trust that this will give us water, and it does, because it's kind of like the go between. You know what I mean? Definitely not the ideal way of doing it,
Right.
but
It'd be like, oh, how would it be? Um, so they have the belief that there is the will of the water.
right,
They quote unquote idolize it as, their, you know, goddess of the rain, or, lord of the
right,
field, or whatever it is. And so they believe in the will or seek after that, but they, let's say, aren't of the right birth, and so they have no um like circuit board connection
right,
to it. However, the baseborn do. And so by maybe what this guy is doing is connecting, taking the essence of that, ability to, like a remote,
right,
um, and putting it in a different object that then is accessible to that peasant because of their
Right.
connection, or to I don't know what the right words would be, but their belief in the will of these things, and not just belief, but their,
Right.
like, I keep coming back to almost like a, was it, because I think we mentioned it the other day in one of them, like, don't believe in yourself, believe in me that believes in you.
Yeah, exactly.
um
Gurren Lagann.
yeah. And so it's like they have, like, they're peasants, they don't have the power, but it's like they do believe, but it's like
They
it
need a
just needs
remote.
redirected in the thing that then will believe in, like, be that connection between that, that space that is lacking.
Right.
So as they don't have the connection to be able to manipulate it, the baseborn does now, in the, trapped in the artifact of that, household idol, their belief in that will, which that other thing has access to, then activates through that in order to, give them a little bit of that connected power back to, what they
Yeah.
already believe in.
And my thought is, as we're sitting here, I'm thinking, who is this guy who knows all this stuff? My thought is that maybe he is spirit, right? As all of these different elements have wills and were given dominion over certain things, maybe it's been long enough that he is the will of spirit, right? He is the one who binds them together. And so he's just kind of like,
And in the darkness find them.
yeah, exactly. No, he's the one who he's the one who binds them together, right? He is the one who is given dominion to, when the world was being created, to create the complexities of the human mind, or to create love or devotion, or to, all these things that bind people together. So he's just kind of he's kind of taken personhood, or he's manifested as a person now, and he just kind of travels around, trying to reinstill the connection however he can. So they say, oh, this is this idol, as he's giving it to them, and he's like, well, that's one name that they go by, and he tries to like teach them, because he specifically points out, and he specifically targets people who aren't in power and are trying desperately to, who have the belief but don't have the ability to accomplish what they want.
The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Exactly. I don't know if you like that idea or not. I was just
I
thinking about
do.
that because
That's
he he's the wise old man, you
Yeah.
know he's taken human form, and he can be killed and he can be stopped and he needs to eat, and he's not like a god or anything, but he's just kind of traveling around, trying to create some cohesive system as he sees the baseborn. As more and more of them appear, less and less belief is given to these house gods, and spirits sitting there trying to like find some way to revitalize it how it was in the old days before humans got so big and proud and selfish. We're
Yeah.
doing a lot of this, but I want to end it here and do an episode next week with new story elements. I like this one.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Wait It Gets Better. If you like this episode, this beginning episode, just let me know. At me on Twitter at @GetsBetterCast, or send me an email at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com. If you have any cool ideas about this story or future story ideas, send them my way. I will shout you out if you want. If you have no good ideas, if you think all of our ideas are bad, I would say just wait. It gets better.